Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here. I'm really excited to be joined by both Nick and Chris, two two researchers, practitioners, thinkers who I'm deeply in awe of, and I'm really excited to be in conversation with them and see. So thank you for the panel. I'm just going to give a little bit of brief background on the show, and then we'll hear from Nick about his work, and then Chris about his work. So this panel with New Orleans Haitian artist Nic Brierre-Aziz and journalist Chris Schiano of Unicorn Riot explores what it means to create work, be it research work or artwork that focuses on, documents, explores, and then condemns systemic violence. Nic Brierre-Aziz is a Haitian New Orleanian interdisciplinary artist and curator. His current practice is deeply community focused and rooted around the utilization of personal and collective histories to reimagine the future. In addition to his personal practice, he currently serves as the community engagement curator for the New Orleans Museum of Art. He has contributed publications such as HuffPost, Burnaway, and Afropunk, and his work has been featured by the Oxford American, the Associated Press, and the Alternative UK. He's been a recipient of several notable artist residencies and fellowships, and most recently was selected as a 2020 Andy Warhol Foundation Curatorial Fellow. He obtained a Bachelor of Arts degree from Morehouse College and a Master of Science degree from the University of Manchester. And Chris Schiano is a journalist, writer, and researcher with the Minnesota-based indie media collective Unicorn Riot. His work focuses on exposing racist and far-right organizing and law enforcement repression of social movements. Since covering the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017, he's worked on the Discord League's Data Journalism Archive, which exposed the planning conversations of rally organizers and affiliated organizations. And the theme of this panel builds off some work and research I've been doing in this show, Architectures of Violence, which is a compilation of research work, interviews, articles, and artworks exploring online protest, online harassment, white supremacy, and digital violence. Our online lives are as real as our offline lives, and both are equally designed spaces. Architecture, policy, governance systems, and social norms are designed. They have constraints to them, rules, and those constraints impact society and culture. To create art that explores this murkiness and violence within platforms, we cannot divorce the systemic inequality and inequity that exists in non-digital spaces. Technology is a mirror to the physical world. Technology, much like architecture, is built, coordinated, and planned. Every button is accounted for, and every interaction a user can do online was meticulously designed. Platforms have inordinate amounts of control, money, and influence. And while platforms can boost user bases larger than any country in current existence, they also create billions of dollars in profit. Meaning any kind of harm incurred on a platform, that platform does have the resources to fix that should they choose to. Now, I'm making a somewhat complicated issue simplified. There's more to platforms than necessarily not wanting to solve harm. It's more that they have no incentive to, and often want to solve these problems as cheaply as possible, meaning with technology. But these issues require human context and training. Understanding the dog whistles of white supremacy or the nuances in harassment cases requires research, care, and context. These particular issues are ones intrinsic of our times and problems that should be explored, documented, and responded to in research and art. So as an artist and former photojournalist, I believe it's incredibly pertinent and urgent to create art about the current context and problems we are navigating. Since 2013, I've been studying online harassment, looking at the harmful content and violent corners of the internet. But most of the harm I saw happened on our clear net and mainstream areas of the internet and major platforms like Reddit, YouTube, 4chan, 8chan, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. This harm constitutes online harassment, violent threats, misinformation, disinformation, doxing, which is the release of someone's personal information or public documents, death threats, and the list goes on. These themes of digital harm bleed into my artwork as well as my research work, since I am both a researcher and an artist. Having been trained as a photojournalist, I then received a master's in design and technology, but my background is in journalism, and photography shapes how I approach technology-based art and research-based storytelling. Architectures of Violence is an expanded documentary art show inspired by the news media, tabloids, TV journalism, but reinterpreting these subjects through digital architecture, platforms, architecture, and harms of our built offline and online environment. Expanded documentary is a practice of exploring truths and research through multinodal experiential and interactive artifacts and design. I go into platforms and I collect and document content, much like a photojournalist with a camera documenting unfolding events. This show at Telematic explores the blurriness and smears between different ideological movements that deal in misinformation and disinformation and malinformation. First Draft News, a nonprofit that explores and documents misinformation, created this term malinformation and defines it as genuine information that is shared to cause harm. This includes private or revealing information that is spread to harm a person or reputation. By utilizing nonfiction elements as methods for artistic exploration, I aim to document, uncover, and comment on the white supremacist structures that are embedded and interwoven in our online and offline lives, technologies, and environments. Architectures of Violence is a 4-piece series that includes the project Within the Terms and Conditions, series of videos exploring harmful topics in creator culture and YouTube, Monument, a 3D rendered animation video that explores the urgency of taking down Confederate monuments while itself becoming a monument to those removals. The Discord Leaks Archive, which is a digital archive utilizing storytelling, design, and research to explore the work of the journalist collective Unicorn Riot and their work infiltrating and leaking neo-Nazi Discord channels. And then a project called Sketchbook, a collage of 50 sketches from a keynote PowerPoint sketchbook I've created that explores surveillance capitalism, platform dominance, and online harm. I've been adding to this sketchbook since 2017. So this piece, which I was hoping to play, but I think it's a little too much for my internet here in Berlin, is Within the Terms and Conditions. And this project explores the questions of what is allowed to be online, stay online, and spread online. Equally important, this art project explores what is harmful and when it's time for content to go. So this project explores harmful content, conspiracy theories, and videos on YouTube. This piece features 91 videos divided into 9 categories: conspiracy theories related to COVID, anti-vax, anti, which stands for anti-immigration, anti-Islam, anti-corona, and anti-big technology; conservative conspiracy theories, general misinformation, white supremacy, racialized disinformation, gender-based violence and harassment, and TERFs and anti-trans rhetoric. My methodology here was loose but structured. Since my role is not to be a content moderator, but a researcher on harmful and problematic content, deciding what is harmful, I cast a wide net of videos that are harmful, but not necessarily breaking YouTube's policies, as well as videos that clearly do. However, I could not include videos that were covering a harmful subject in regards to unpacking it. Instead, I was looking for videos that push ideological hate frameworks, harassment, extremist content, misinformation, disinformation, and transphobia. To determine the intent and content of the video, I had to watch every single one to make a decision. In the end, I only included 91 videos in the project, but I estimate I watched almost 150 videos to find this final 91. Now, some of these videos are 10 minutes long, but some of them are also 2 hours long. So I estimate I probably watched over 120 or 130 hours, perhaps even more in total. Some of these, almost like happenstance, unfolded around me while I was researching and creating a particular category. In March 2019, at the same time, I was watching videos exploring anti-trans sentiment and the gender critical theory. A controversy was unfolding in the US media over the newsletter platform Substack. These videos approach trans identity as a subject open for debate, ridicule, or an identity that should not exist at all. TERFs and gender critical theory are harmful in nature because they remove the humanity of trans people or deny their identity altogether. Many anti-trans writers have been deplatformed in spaces like Twitter. They are migrating to Substack, like Graham Lineham. In real time, I could see these conversations unfolding across many different platforms. This immediacy and fluidity of topics across platforms illustrates not only the position that YouTube holds in the circulation of online content, but also the power relations between platforms that make this content visible and accessible. These videos can be watched and viewed online. I definitely suggest watching them. They are layered for a variety of reasons. Part of that is not to overly platform those making the harmful content. But another reason is also sort of to mimic the amount of noise we see on platforms like YouTube. What we see here is the interactive Discord Leaks archive. This interactive piece offers a glimpse into two neo-Nazi servers that were infiltrated and put online for journalists to use by the journalist collective Unicorn Riot as a part of their data project, the Discord Leaks. In recent years, the chat and video platform Discord has become popular amongst gamers and now the far right. In 2020, Discord said they removed over 2,000 far-right white supremacist and extremist servers. However, since 2016, Unicorn has been investigating, infiltrating, and exposing these servers to deplatform Nazis. To explore digital harm online and not shine a light on how much Discord is used by white supremacists would be an oversight. Over the past 2 years, I've been volunteering a little bit with the collective as a writer and a researcher. And in this piece, I wanted to explore friction as a storytelling method and archives as a form of protest, as well as a form of proof. This piece, out of all the others, is the most standard or straight form of journalism in the show. It utilizes design to help break down key points of the archive while providing necessary friction and warning labels before accessing content. This friction is key should such content be so easily accessible without warnings, without barriers. The content is still accessible, but slightly difficult to access. This difficulty and friction stands directly in opposition of major platforms where content is so easy to find, so easy to click on, and it's so easy to access. This is the Peace Monument. For the past 2 years, I've lived in Berlin, Germany. What's important to realize about Berlin is how much the city itself is a monument and a physical archive to it and its citizens' momentous, traumatic, and violent history. Almost every street has a form of a monument or a remembrance. Parts of former East Berlin still have specific architecture and crossing lights from the former Soviet era. The Berlin Wall still stands in some areas or is commemorated in sculpture, statues, and bronze lines dotting the ground. Across the city stands different monuments erected towards victims of the Holocaust, such as the large-scale Memorial to the Murdered Jews of Europe with black rectangles and 2,711 slabs. But the city also has these small bronze plaques, ones that I only noticed once I moved. Walking along the cobblestones, you can almost miss them, but they're there dotted throughout the city. These bronze plaques are called Stolperstein, or stumbling blocks. There's about 70,000 stumbling blocks across over 1,000 cities in Europe. There's a kind of tension in these statues, monuments, and museums to the past. It's necessary to remember and never forget what happened. This kind of blunt confrontation of a refusal to forget is necessary. The harmful parts of the past should not be forgotten, but acknowledged. Can we remove the harm, but acknowledge it as well? Growing up in New Orleans, Louisiana, I was well aware of the Confederate statues across the city and the streets named after Confederate soldiers and generals. These quote unquote tributes sat as white supremacist structures designed to silence Black people and serve as a reminder that the past was here. Recently, New Orleans and other cities across the United States removed some of these statues. This removal is necessary and urgent, but America likes to smooth over tension and harm and erase it to pretend it was never there. The monument is a piece I made to acknowledge and confront this racist past and false iconography of New Orleans, while also uplifting the act of removal itself. The monument is a 3D animated painting of a Greco-Roman column that once served as the plinth for a Robert E. Lee statue in New Orleans. The leftover plinth is broken apart and made into a new statue with a plaque reading, "A monument for the monuments that should have been taken down and the ones that have," forcing an acknowledgement and remembrance of what has transpired. This new monument eventually breaks apart as well, turning into rubble. And this is Sketchbook. So since 2017, I've been making maps, diagrams, and sketches as a way to situate myself in complex topics, difficult research, and systems design. Particularly in this kind of research, I use drawing as a form of wayfinding and hypothesis. What we see here is a collage of some of the sketches. I've made about 50, and they're arranged in kind of a Nam June Paik-esque sort of sculpture that almost looks like robotic bodies. They're grouped according to theme as well as color and then micro themes within the sketches themselves. And I'll show just a few of them. This is an image that came out of a diagram I made with activist and researcher Emily Gorczynski, showing how that there's these different kinds of overlapping but related forms of hate ideology, and that it's not necessarily a scale of hatred, they're all actually equal in how harmful they can be, hence the use of circles. But they're all also a form of white supremacy. These are other sketches sort of ruminating on algorithms and data and archives, as well as YouTube. Thank you so much. And Nick, would you like to share your work?
Well, good afternoon or evening or morning, wherever everyone is. My name is, once again, Nic Brierre-Aziz. I'm a interdisciplinary artist and curator, born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana. And just gonna take a few moments just to share a little bit about my curatorial and art making practices. So for me, all of my work, whether it's art making or curation, starts with my family. I'm Monique and Omar's son. I'm Jean and Nicole Ribou's grandson. I'm Hanif and Omar's grandson. And so I think a lot of my work is rooted in that history and that heritage, and really using that as a mirror to just learn more about myself, about the place that I exist in New Orleans, the heritage of myself as being the son of a Haitian woman. And so this image is of my grandparents, and my grandfather was born in Damari, Haiti in 1915. And he immigrated to Canada, where he went to medical school in Montreal, and then from that point settled in Shreveport, Louisiana. And throughout his life, in 1944, he started a Haitian art collection. And from that point, he met my grandmother in 1956, and throughout their lifetimes, they collected Haitian art. And so I just had the opportunity, the privilege to grow up around this and really be, I think, consciously and subconsciously influenced by Haiti, and by this work, by this Black beauty. So in thinking about, New Orleans, as I said, born in New Orleans, these images to me really fuel a lot of my practice. I show this series of images often when I do presentations because, if you look at all these images, one, especially in New Orleans, would assume, oh, this is all New Orleans, when in actuality, these first two images at the top are Haiti. These bottom row, that's New Orleans, but obviously they're identical. And so I think, for me, I've always been fascinated with that. And that's something that I really try to show the connections of between my work. And I think that just that idea is an act of preservation. It's an act of combating erasure. And for me, and I think obviously in the Western world context, violence and erasure often are synonymous. And so I think for those who are unaware, in 1809, 5 years after the Haitian Revolution, nearly 10,000 Haitians came to New Orleans, and with them brought second lining, shotgun houses, many of the spices that we use today, the food culture. So much basically of New Orleans culture that we celebrate today is rooted in Haiti, via West Africa. And so I think a lot of my work really tries to illustrate that history. And so again, just using works from my family's collection from a curatorial standpoint to do that. This was a series that I had that ran up until COVID for 2 years at Preservation Hall here in New Orleans, a local jazz venue. It was entitled Beauté Oubliée, which is Creole for forgotten beauty. So I was thinking again about that idea of the forgotten beauty of the Haitian New Orleans connection and using the works from the collection to do that, but also thinking about, in this first room here, as you see on the left, this idea of the forgotten beauty that exists within all of our personal family histories. I think we all have different stories and different histories within ourselves that I think often, we sometimes take for granted, sometimes forget about. And so the series was kind of like that idea of the personal and collective forgotten beauty. And viewers could come and engage with the exhibition and, fill out, these different cards that would give, have different questions, saying, like one would say, what's something you wish you knew more about yourself? What's something about a family member that you wish you knew more about? Just kind of really trying to illustrate that concept. I share this image. This is the New Orleans Museum of Art. This is where I currently serve as the community engagement curator, but it's also a very controversial place. I mean, I think the idea that this is a museum that was erected in 1911, it did not allow Black people to walk through the doors until 1968 or 69. So for the fact that this building within an industry such as art that is extremely racist, exclusionary, and classist, didn't allow Black people or people of color to even come to the door for half of its history. That's something that, I as a Black man, as a Black curator, as a Black artist have to really wrestle with daily and thinking about the work that I do. In addition to that, in New Orleans, this is a building that exists on former plantation land. And so, again, just having to really think about that in terms of art and art making, especially I think from a curatorial standpoint of how you combat that history. So one, I think, example of that was a show that I co-curated in 2019, again, illustrating that Haitian New Orleans connection. This was a show called Bon Dieu Between and Beyond. It was featuring 14 different Vodou prayer flags. The lead artist was Tina Gerard, a Louisiana-born artist, and she collaborated with Edgar Jean-Louis and Georges Valrice in Haiti during her time living there. She lived there for about 6 or 7 years in the 90s and produced these flags. And so the flags, each of them represented a different Loa, which is spirit within the Vodou religion. And just really attempting, I think, to demystify Vodou as a spiritual practice, combat the demonization of West African and Caribbean styles of spirituality. And also, again, just really showing that connection between New Orleans and Haiti. And so this was the, installation in the museum. And it was amazing. It was amazing to see people's reactions and to see, people sparked and understand those connections between New Orleans and Haiti more. But, to me, again, combating the exclusion that these types of spaces and buildings, hold, part of it was going out, into the city and really using the exhibition as an engagement tool. So this is an example where I went to a family festival and simply, I would have a game where I would put those same pictures, multiple pictures of New Orleans and Haiti on the table. And I would just play a simple game of which one is which. And almost, 9 times out of 10, people would have trouble. And we talk about, okay, so let's talk about why you're having trouble. And that would just be, to me, a simple, easy way to illustrate that connection, but also then expose, to what was happening in this building that has been and continues to be in so many ways exclusionary. So, that's kind of curatorially where my work comes from. In terms of art making, again, like Caroline, being born in New Orleans and just having to consume symbols oftentimes that you don't know the history of. I think in the South, we have a really, so often, I think there's so many symbols, whether it's a name, whether it's an actual statue, whether it's a subtle symbol, there's so many different layers to our history that we just consume, without really questioning, without really interrogating. And so I think a lot of my practice, as you'll see in these next couple of slides, really attempts to do that. And so, one piece was this statue. Again, as I mentioned, right behind the statue went up in 1915 in front of NOMA. So 4 years after NOMA was founded, a Confederate statue goes up in front of it as its welcome mat, in my opinion. And it took 100 years for the city to say, okay, no, this doesn't belong here. And so I think that just says so much to the idea of place, the idea of the land, the fact that this was in front of a former plantation, for 100 years. So one piece that I collaborate on with an art, this was an image of when the statue was being taken down. But before it came down, I collaborated with an artist named T-Rock Moore, and we created this piece and entitled it New Wars, New Stories, New Heroes, and just really recontextualizing, remixing, reclaiming, in a way, this very prominent space that has been rooted in a very oppressive racist history. And so, yeah. Similar, I think the idea of recontextualization of symbols and remixing symbols is something that's very prominent in my work. So these symbols, one is Kentucky Fried Chicken. Obviously, that's, it's the second largest restaurant chain in the world behind McDonald's. And then Core Civic, which is a lesser known, symbol, but it is the largest private prison corporation in the world. It exists here in the United States. It's a $2 billion publicly traded private prison corporation. And so a piece that I created that was inspired by these two symbols was this. And so as you can see on the text on the screen, this symbol, or this piece, Family Dinner Finger Clicking Good, was just an assemblage in which I took a photograph of. It's now available as a large scale print, but it's just really looking at that connection between KFC and Core Civic. And so the founder, as you can see, sold KFC to Jack Massey in 1964. Jack Massey then sold it, 7 years later for $239 million, which modern day equivalent is most likely close to about $1 billion that he made from that sale. And then he uses some of that profit to fund the founding of Core Civic. Core Civic was founded by three men, one of whom prior to founding Core Civic ran a cotton plantation in Texas. And so I think, just really trying to illuminate the interconnectivity of all these symbols in this piece, but then also this really buried in some ways history. And so again, I think just a prominent theme within my work. Currently, I'm doing a series of work that I started in 2019 called White Barbies. And really the angle for this work really is looking at what I think, sometimes is our misuses of the term white supremacy. I think it's, a term that is, in some cases utilized correctly, but often, I think a perfect example to me is if we look at the cop that had his knee on George Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes. There's nothing supreme about that. That is barbaric behavior. And I think, kind of even in line with, the title of this panel, name it what it is. I think naming that act as barbarism, as barbaric behavior, is something that we need to acknowledge. And so, as you'll see in these next couple of pieces, really acknowledging history, but also the barbaric nature of some of what we're experiencing is part of this series of works. So this piece was one I did last year. Again, I've started to refer to my work as historical pop cultural assemblage, and just that idea, I think of blending often historical and pop cultural symbols. And so this was a simple remix of Virgil Abloh's Off-White shoes, which are one of the most quote unquote fashionable brands right now in the world, and just simply remixing it to the names of Ahmaud Arbery and the man that led to his assassination. And just thinking about that idea of trendiness, the trendiness of Black pain and Black death right now, value, the idea that these shoes cost more than the tool that was used to kill Ahmaud. And yeah, just really thinking about the Black body and value in this context. This, another simple remix, simply removing the A, from this tells a completely different story. Black is the new Black Macintosh. And so Francis McIntosh was a porter who docked in St. Louis in April of 1836. He was unjustly arrested. He was put in prison. He escaped. He was caught and put back in prison. When he was put back in prison, a mob of white people took him out, took him to a tree, and lynched him. And this is apparently recorded as the first recorded lynching. And I put recorded in quotes because lynchings were most likely occurring before that period. But this is referred to as the first recorded lynching in United States history. So again, taking a very prominent pop cultural symbol and just simply remixing it to tell a different story and a different narrative with this piece. These next couple of pieces are from a recent exhibition that I had with an artist named Gabri Garcia Stibe here in New Orleans. And this particular piece was looking at the history of the fleur-de-lis. Fleur-de-lis is arguably New Orleans' most prominent symbol, but it is a symbol that was used to brand runaway slaves at one point in its history. And so, again, as someone who's born and raised here, just being fascinated with that concept that, this symbol can be so prominent. It's on our trash cans. People have it as tattoos. It's on everything. In this city, arguably. And I think to really think about the history of it, not to necessarily do away with it, but just to really acknowledge, to me, the history of this symbol in a similar lane to how we do with the Confederate monuments. And I think, to me, the irony or the beauty in some ways of this is that, I learned recently that this fleur-de-lis was actually appropriated from the Egyptian lotus. And so to me, as you can see in the text, that idea that the fleur-de-lis is now a little bit more connected to its actual root. The fleur-de-lis now is a symbol in New Orleans that exists, as a symbol of pride, as a symbol of unity. And I think, the idea that, it did have this controversial moment in its history, but now it is, more synonymous with the Egyptian lotus and what it meant at that time, in history, is there's something there to me that's beautiful. But really, I think the first step is acknowledging, all these different sides of this symbol. And so again, continuing with that line of the fleur-de-lis in history, thinking about an image like this, in New Orleans, the New Orleans Saints are one of our, most celebrated entities. And this display to me is one that really illustrates or tries to promote value. Like there's a reason that this display is displayed this way, because this is somebody we should acknowledge and remember and honor. And so I'm fascinated with this, but I chose to remix it to create this piece. And so again, thinking about the irony that a fleur-de-lis, despite being used to brand runaway slaves, is now in that same position on a all-Black football team. To me, that's something. But also the fact that, I know way more about Drew Brees than I do about Charles Deslon. Charles Deslon was the leader of the 1811 slave rebellion here in New Orleans. It was the largest rebellion of enslaved people in North American history. And they came very close to establishing an independent free republic, which at that time would have been a new Haiti. The rebellion was put down, and some of those survivors were put on trial, and some of the survivors were beheaded, and their heads were placed along stakes along the Mississippi River as a warning. And I think that's a history, again, unfortunately, in the city is not talked about as much. Dred Scott in 2019 did a project where he reenacted this rebellion. And that, got the rebellion in the lexicon, I think, a little bit more, but it's still a very buried piece of history that I think, needs to be addressed. There's other artists as well, Christina K. Robinson, who does a lot of work here around that history as well. But again, just this a very buried piece of history I think needs unearthing. And so this piece and a series of works that I'm doing is exploring that. So again, just kind of thinking about that idea of the value and the display, the way we acknowledge. Jess Amin was an enslaved African on the Destrehan plantation. He was, part of the rebellion, and obviously was when the rebellion was quelled, he was put on trial. His court case number was 91. And so I think, making a series of works that is acknowledging this history, the role of Black bodies historically, contemporarily, I think is something that these works are attempting to illuminate. And again, thinking about the Black body, the Black image, I think this work called Target Audience, again, is thinking about that. To me, the abstraction of the Black experience is something I'm really fascinated with these works. And thinking about how, we see, Black pain and oppression in public spaces on the internet, but there's so many ways in which oppression, marginalization happens in more private spaces. And so I think using the gun range target paper, as a metaphor for that, like that idea of, the image, the black body, and the oppression that can occur within more private, secluded spaces. And finally, I have a series of video works that are, I'm currently finishing the third one, but all of these video works are exploring the Black body, the oppression really, and the commodification of the Black body versus the Black artifact, the Black art. And so Pimpin' Ain't Easy was a piece that was exhibited here in the Ogden Museum last year. It was an amalgamation of archival footage looking at the imperial foundations of museums and their looting of African objects. And so, and really thinking about how that foundation of African art in the Western world being looting and the relationship between that foundation to how Black art is appreciated today. The Block is Hot is a second video piece. Have yet to release this one publicly, but it's looking at slave auctions versus art auctions, and just the juxtaposition of those two concepts, those two events, and the relationship between that historically and contemporarily. Again, just thinking about Black value, the Black body versus the Black artifact. And then finally, Juicy Fruit is a piece that I'm finishing now. This will be the third and final video piece of the series. And just thinking about, again, the abstraction of the Black experience, how Black art can now be some of the most sought after and acquired work. And yet we're still having to petition for value for our bodies in the streets. So I think just that idea, that irony, that we can be the most avant-garde and yet still have to advocate and petition for value for my body. I can make a piece of work as a Black artist that technically might be more valuable than my body. That's an issue. And I think these video pieces are all exploring those ideas, those concepts, those themes. And so, yeah, that's it for me. And I'll stop sharing right now.
That was so lovely. Thank you so much, Nic. Chris, yeah, are you feeling? You ready?
So yeah, I mean, just a little bit about myself and the group I work with. I'm a member of like a decentralized nonprofit media collective called Unicorn Riot. It was founded in 2015, and it kind of came out of the earlier legacy of indie media collectives that have been covering protest movements in the United States, going back to like the anti-globalization movement or the Occupy movement. We kind of started a little bit after the Ferguson Rebellion in 2014, and most of what our work was focusing on was basically live streaming protests or live tweeting video from protests, just trying to give like a more raw, unfiltered view of what was going on in the ground. And so I didn't really set out to be understanding or researching neo-Nazis and hate groups and hate speech on the internet. But so part of the journey that led me there, this image here is, it was a rally that led up to the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. This is in Pikeville, Kentucky in April 2017. Some people we knew let us know that this thing was going on and that we should go down to Kentucky and check it out. And we were live streaming. And I didn't really know who any of these guys were. But I'm trying to get into their little gated off event here. And this guy with a gun like won't let me in. I didn't know who he was. I later learned that was this guy named Dylan Irizarry, or Dylan Hopper, who he's a former Marine recruiter and was the leader of Vanguard America, which was one of the main Nazi groups involved in Unite the Right. So, and then later me and some of my colleagues at the time went to Charlottesville in August 2017 to report on the Nazi rally. We live streamed some of it. And while we were there or on our way, we started to get leaks from someone who had infiltrated the organizing chats for the group. And so it became this, we kind of thought we were just going to check out the rally and show people what happened, like a one and done. And then it just became this basically never ending, like we're still working on it years later, of just really unfolding this really large data trail that these people had created, incriminating themselves, showing their different networks of who was involved with who, and really offering like a pretty deep dive into the relationships that are built in white supremacist movements, how they create a group identity together. My interest in it was mostly like immediate accountability sort of journalism, just being like, oh, this this person says that this is who they are and they were here and they did this, but it also, over time, we're starting to see that it's also giving like a more sociological view into these movements. And really, I've always felt like a newcomer to this beat, and there's a lot of people that have been putting in really hard work trying to expose these groups for a long time. So it just seemed like getting the leaks of their data was like an opportunity to support and enable other people to do more work by just like using our organization's resources to put the information out there. So hold on. Okay, there we go. So this is another example. This is something we found in a Discord chat. Oh, so I should back up. So yeah, most of the chat data we obtained was from a platform called Discord, which I think people are probably familiar with. It's like a chat program made for gamers. And some of these groups have gotten off this platform. But in 2017, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, basically Discord had a monopoly on the communications of the white supremacist movement because they were all on it. They all loved it. It helped them recruit young people. It's really good software with really good features, and it's free. And so this is from a chat we scraped from a group called Anti-Com, or Anti-Communist Action. They were a group that was more kind of fronted as libertarians or anarcho-capitalists, but most of their main players were just straight up neo-Nazis, Holocaust deniers, rabid anti-Semites. And so this graphic I like to use a lot when I talk about these groups because it just shows it's not exactly sophisticated, but there's a difference between how they'll present to the public and then how they talk in private. And so, and they're Nazis, they're fascists, they want to harm and target Black people, other people of color, anti-racists, trans people, Jewish people, journalists, you know, and so, but they can be deceptive in the way that they present, at least they try to be, especially like slicker people like Richard Spencer, or at least they try to be slick. So, and one of the values we saw in getting their chats and publishing them in the Discord Leaks archive is one of my colleagues likes to call it an information vaccine, where at least for people in the media that are going to do more research, it really enables you to sort of see what tricks they're trying to pull. And so this part here, this is from the actual planning chats from Charlottesville we got, and this kind of encapsulates the main value that the information played for us, at least immediately, where people are probably familiar with a woman named Heather Heyer was murdered towards the end of the rally when a young man drove his car into a crowd of people that were marching, and he was sentenced for her murder. He's doing life in prison. But this showed, and this is just one example, they were repeatedly talking about basically like wanting someone to drive their car into a crowd. And so that has turned into, there's been quite a few like criminal investigations that I'm not sure if anything's come of it, but also there's a really large lawsuit that's going to go to trial in October using the chat information we published. So that was like right away, that lawsuit got filed pretty shortly after we published things. So that was basically encouraged us that there was something to this information that we should keep digging. But there's a lot to consider when working on this stuff. I've kind of had to learn the hard way. We didn't necessarily know what we were doing at first when we set out to go through this information and publish it. But once we published the Charlottesville chats, people started to approach us who had infiltrated other groups, and we kind of, the Discord Leaks project sort of became a clearinghouse for chat logs from different neo-Nazi groups, and we could combine them and show the overlap between different groups and stuff like that. And so I'd like to say we have it down to an art or a science. That's not quite true, but basically it's kind of demanding. Like you really want to immerse yourself in this information, and because they can have in-group lingo and stuff like that. And so basically it just requires reading all of the information if you can. And there's going to be people they're harassing or people they're targeting, and we try to remove that information. It's imperfect. Like sometimes we have to go back and take things out after we publish it. And there is kind of like practicing harm reduction, but also being like, okay, we see a benefit in holding these people accountable and publishing this. And it's not always perfect. So I think people working on this, it's good to be humble and like willing to be accountable with that. And basically just, yeah, it's working on this stuff is hard. The material is made to be unapproachable and uncomfortable on purpose, because that creates a kind of an opacity, or even if you can go out there and find their information, it's just so nasty and unpleasant that most people aren't going to spend hours going through it. But a lot of it is out there for the taking, for anyone who's interested in doing their own work to expose groups like this. It just takes time. And it takes more time to take care of yourself while you're doing it. Like some days it's just like, this is too much, I'm not gonna do it. But I've really found a benefit in taking like an immersive approach. Like if I'm researching a group and they have a podcast, like I'll try to listen to the episodes while I work and stuff like that. And basically like getting inside their heads it's not pleasant, but I think it is possible to understand these people and to, expose them from a place of knowledge as opposed to like a more surface examination, which I think most media coverage tends to either platform these groups or fall into pitfalls of misunderstanding them. So I think really devoting as much time as is possible to understanding and taking them in on their own, like taking them at face value in public, as well as digesting what they say in private and like getting into their spaces where they feel more comfortable. And so one instructive example that I like to mention is this group is now defunct. They were sort of like an online troll group that would threaten a lot of people. They had some overlap with the Atomwaffen division, which was, I think they've all been arrested by the FBI now, but like a neo-Nazi terrorist group that was tied to several murders. But this is a more informal sort of fan club called the Bull Patrol, which I wrote an article publishing some of their chats in 2019. Like they would worship Dylan Roof, who shot several people at the African-American Episcopal Church, Methodist Church in Charleston. And like they would make memes worshiping his haircut and turning it into this absurdist presentation that if you don't know what they're talking about, it could be almost humorous or funny, or they're trying to instill this attitude of frivolity and almost joy. And then but when you look into it, it's like, no, this is a murderer and they're trying to create more murderers. And so presenting these things was always a challenge for me, because there's really no way to make light of this or make it funny. Like this stuff is really horrible. It's kind of depressing. It's dehumanizing. Like they're using memes to dehumanize people and to like pull other people into that process of dehumanization and to try to make it fun. This meme with the crystal in the center here was one of the less unpleasant ones that I like to share, where they would talk about charging their crystals. Like they would watch interview footage of Dylan Roof, like when he was getting interrogated by the FBI, and they would encourage each other to like take acid and smoke weed and just like vibe out on Dylan Roof, and to like bring each other, kind of egging each other on to get further into that mind state. Kind of like fans of Charles Manson or something would do. Really sick, twisted stuff, but it's not exactly mysterious how these people end up down these rabbit holes. So I think taking a little bit of time to engage with that can be good. The title picture on the top left was like, I was always struggling with what sort of picture should I pick for the article? Like, what do I, because we don't want to platform their stuff, even if we're sort of showing it and archiving it. So I just decided to use the image of the church where Dylan Roof killed all those people, just to be like, hey, this is what really happens, like this is what's at stake. And then the stuff on the bottom and the Discord user ID on the top, the sort of ringleader of this group would use the handle Vic Mackey. And as part of my, I guess, the main artistic or whatever approach I try to apply to this is just really immersing myself and trying to, I don't empathize with these people, but I try to get inside their heads. And so, yeah, he would use the username Vic Mackey, which in the bottom left, there's a show called The Shield that Vic Mackey is a character in. That's where he took his name from. And it's like a 2000s era police procedural drama show. And Vic Mackey is like a corrupt racist detective who he'll like plant drugs on people, sort of frames and brutalizes Black people in the show a lot. And so that was the actual Discord user, Vic Mackey, was eventually exposed as this guy, Andrew Cesares in Orangevale. But he was, before he got exposed as his real identity, he was very much, he was terrorizing various people on the internet, threatening to kill them at their homes, encouraging other people to send threats and things like that. And it was, so it just seemed very informative to me that this person who dedicated his time to terrorizing people online, like chose this like racist, corrupt cop character as to basically be like his seal, his calling card. And then this is, so Caroline used the Patriot Wave chats we published in the exhibition. Patriot Wave is one of the first meme pages that spread some of the Boogaloo memes that, like, 2019 into 2020, these memes were very ascendant in far right spaces. They were, it's not necessarily an organized group, but they were like an online group of friends that would egg each other on. Some of them would try to go to events in real life, and they were all very heavily armed. And they weren't all neo-Nazis, but our reporting shows pretty heavily that there's a lot of neo-Nazi themes in the group, and that them claiming they're not racist or whatever is incorrect. You know, there's a lot of racist ideation, just really just like hungry for violence. But I wanted to show this image because I think sometimes portraying these things in a funny or like mocking light is, I try to do it when I can. And so we found they would share all these pictures of themselves like holding their guns with their, just practicing really bad firearm safety. And so with something like the Dylan Roof stuff or the Charlottesville stuff, I don't think it's ever appropriate to really make light or laugh at these things. Like, it's not funny. But with this group, they just shared themselves being so stupid that it just, I don't know. I try to find joy and humor in this work when I can, but it's very elusive. So I guess I wanted to end on that as just being like, with the Boogaloo story, it seemed like we could introduce a little bit of absurdism. So yeah, there's a lot of different information we published. I guess, Caroline, if you have any questions, there's different aspects of it we could explore. But yeah, that's just a little bit about my journey getting into this work and some of the, like the images we try to select and share from this. It's tricky. I think it's more of like, we try to keep it accessible, but not really celebrate it or hold it up. Yeah, it's very difficult choosing what to select and what to show. And so yeah, I hope that makes sense. We're still working on things. We have more material coming out. And yeah, it's rough, but I think the more people take the time to immerse themselves in this material and understand it and present it in a way that allows for nuance, the more these groups can be held accountable and the less they can thrive. So thanks for letting me share.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was, I mean, these are both really, really fantastic presentations, and, you know, such like rigorous practices y'all both have. I have a lot of questions, and we have, I guess, about like 15-20 minutes to chat, which is exciting. And so one of the questions I just wrote down is something I would love to sort of get y'all's take on. And one of the reasons I'm sort of drawn to both of your work is, I think, like much like the name of our panel, your work is like explicit in like what it's trying to confront. And I deeply appreciate that. Often feedback I've heard as an artist is that I need to make things less didactic and more poetic, yet I've really struggled at times with the poetry, or what I think can be a non-directness or an ambiguity. And I wonder sometimes, can this like strive for like poetic or broadness or broader themes constitute as accidental platforming, for example? So I'm curious as to what you both think. Chris, in talking about Dylan Roof supporters, you're talking about that it's important to know like what it is they're talking about, but also what it is they were trying to do in terms of masking, memeing, but even going beyond that and sort of like obliquely, opaquely masking what they were talking about. I think both of y'all's work is so direct and fantastically urgent and ardently so. I think, Nic, your work too, and explicitly, with like white Barbies, for example, really trying to confront varying aspects of white supremacy, naming particular individuals, for example, to sort of call out the harm and the violence they had suffered. And so I would just love to know what y'all think about this. As we are more direct in harm naming, what's the problem if we are ambiguous? Is ambiguity an accidental mask of harm? Any thoughts?
Yeah, yeah, a lot of thoughts. I'm trying to think about where to start from it. Yeah, I've gotten similar feedback, I think, before with some of my work too. And yeah, I just try to root myself in the message of what I'm trying to portray, and however that comes out, whether it is a photo, whether it is a remix, of a document. Like I have one piece that's a remix of it's this author named John Van Every, who was I think recorded as like the first professional, like I think racist like scientist, I think. And yeah, whatever material I'm using, or if it's a video, whatever material I'm using, I think I'm just rooting myself in like the message, of the work. And I think though that at the same time, like with the Jersey works, like that is, I think that allows an entry point for people who, like especially in New Orleans, you instantly recognize Saints and the jerseys, and it's like, it's an entry point to be like, oh, I've shown that piece and like, oh, well, which player is this? And I'm like, it's Charles Desmond, and like, who's that? It's like, I think I try to incorporate symbols or even sounds sometimes that like are resonant, approachable, and in some ways disarming. Like even with my video works, like often the music is something that connects people instantly to it, because it's like, oh, like I know this song, but like I don't know about museums and their histories of Luton African objects. It's like, so kind of thinking about ways that you can kind of almost meet people where they're at. And just that, like kind of show that abstraction of just the human experience, but particularly the Black human experience,
Totally. This show for me was like my sort of attempt at still trying to maintain directness, or at least not being very, very explicit in harm naming, but also trying to translate my practice more into, I guess, like a traditional arts practice, and sort of like not quite there. And I guess in the sense of when we think of traditional art, but I think it's like very powerful in the way the artifacts that I've created. It is this expanded documentary practice. Chris, I'm also interested in your thoughts, coming at this as a researcher, and also in a way too, you are now like this digital archivist. It's kind of what the Discord Leaks team is doing. Speaking of a project I also occasionally work on. But one of the things I would love to hear is sort of like your thoughts on that as well, of, again, you have to almost like as a detective, an investigator in a way, slice through the ambiguity on the other side, right? So when these groups are sort of creating the opacities, like with the Dylan Roof group, you have to like understand and like decipher, right, in a way, those opacities, those hidden like hidden meanings in the memes. And I'm wondering, like, sort of what are your thoughts on having to sort of navigate that, and then also recognizing kind of what they're doing, with the meme you started with of people speaking privately and then speaking publicly.
Yeah, I think that's one of the one of the reasons I'm so glad we've been able to publish these chats in full, basically. We're like, can I just share my screen one more time?
Yeah, go for it.
So this is like the page, the server that planned the Charlottesville rally, and all the different chats we published have this. You can click onto, for instance, this account, Mad Dimension. That's Jason Kessler, who organized, he's like the chief rally organizer, who's getting the pantsuit off of him now. And so it.
Yeah, his is the trial that's coming up, right?
In October, yeah.
Yeah.
So it lets you go through and basically just see everything they've said. So anyway, I just wanted to give folks just like a sense of what that looks like. And so there's kind of, in terms of trying to understand or seek knowledge of how they operate, there's kind of like diamonds in the rough, I guess. Like you're kind of just like slogging through all this crap, but then there will be some pretty lucid comments about like, oh, we want the conservatives to come so that then Antifa will attack the conservatives and we can say that we're just innocent conservatives being attacked, or different, they'll share their little deceptive strategies, or because these chats are kind of like more of like a private space where they feel comfortable. So eventually you're going to find something that's more revealing. So it just kind of takes time. But
this kind of reminds me of like early on, I'd say like in mis and disinfo studies, or at least like I'm also reflecting on like the earlier conversations that were happening in the online harassment world in like 2014, 2015, which was almost like the burden of proof. How do you prove these groups are like serious in what they're saying? You know, a lot of this comes from like how like legally you hold people accountable for digital harm. It's very hard to. You have to actually like, let people have the space to say hyperbolic things online. But I feel like in these cases, because they are private spaces, I often then reflect back on something that I've heard said by victims of facing harassment, which is like when someone shows you their true self, believe them. So like in this case, when people are using these kinds of comments, even though they're engaging in all these different levels of irony, like irony on top of irony on top of irony, which is like abstraction on top of abstraction on top of abstraction. When there are these lucid moments, we should also believe them. Like we should believe them when they're holding different pictures of guns. Those are things that they own, right? Or we should believe them when they talk about these things, even if they're engaging in this kind of trolling rhetoric, you know, which is supposed to sort of have each person like one up each other. But that there is, you know, that's something I think a lot about, which is what I've appreciated with the Discord leaks is Unicorn Riot takes this idea of belief very seriously. It seems of like, you're like, we do believe them when they say this. We do believe that this is something that they're going to engage in at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I think it lets you see, going through someone's chat records, it's kind of like a transcript where you can see them, where maybe they're posting memes, but then they're like, oh, okay, I'm on my way, or I'm here, or like, I just got in a fight. And so it's, yeah, it's basically stuff that, I mean, some of the stuff is being used in court now. Some of it maybe could, but isn't, or things don't always move into court, but it definitely is, you can, for anyone who takes the time to go over these detailed chat records, it's, yeah, you can sort of see people's development, and they're, yeah, at a certain point, it's no longer irony. Like the irony is maybe a way to pull people into being invested, but then they, yeah, they demonstrate their investment with activity, and I think that's when it crosses the line and it's no longer ambiguous.
Totally. Switching gears a little slightly, Nic, I'd love to like ask you a little bit about your practice. So much of your practice is really rooted in this kind of like deep research. I love how you described your practice earlier, and I'm totally gonna butcher this quote, but it's almost like pop culture through like historical reference or historical situation, which I really loved that. And yeah, so much of your work is pulling from like media theory, art history, archives, like people's archives in a way. And so it seems like research is obviously shaping your work. And I'm just curious, like, what is your process? Like, can you tell me a little bit about how when you start an idea is like forming or germinating, you know, how do you sort of unpack it, you know, if you will? And because again, I love that you're dealing with so many issues that are rooted in the contemporary, but obviously are have these deep historical roots to them?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, part of it probably comes from just like, I think my art making is influenced by my curatorial practice in history and curation, because I think as a curator, your role is often to be a bridge, a translator, and kind of like show those points of connectivity between different objects or themes or words. And so I think that just kind of bleeds over into my art making. And I think in terms of, how the process usually goes, I mean, I think a lot of it is I consume a lot. I read a lot of different stuff. I YouTube, going down YouTube, watching rabbit holes, often, and that's kind of how a lot of my video works have come together. It's just, even in Instagram. I mean, I think like, social media is something like I think, especially like just being born in the 90s, it's like, I think, I say like, I'm a 90s baby. And I think like, like pop culture, was a big thing growing up, just, like I think about like Nickelodeon or, Disney Channel, it's just like, I think just the way that, our generation was consuming media from the beginning, like internet, came about, I'm thinking about like LimeWire and Kazaa and like all those different platforms to like download music. I think all of that really, I think, influences the way I go about making work. And yeah, and I think though, like at the root of it, because of my upbringing, because of my personal heritage as a Haitian, person, because of, I think, like growing up in a city like New Orleans, it's like history is so much, so present. And I think just kind of like making those connections between the contemporary and the historical is just something I'm really attached to. And I think like even the idea, like based on the definition of pop culture, slavery was pop culture at one point, so I think like, yeah, just like really kind of like, hammering on that sometimes too is a part of the work.
Thank you for that. We have time for just a few more questions. So Chris, I guess jumping back to my my previous question, yeah, I was just curious, like, are there other examples that come to mind of like the impact of the investigative work that that Unicorn Riot and the Discord leaks are doing, beyond the court cases?
Yeah, I mean, the court case is definitely the biggest one. It's the Sines versus Kessler trial. I think it's going to go to trial this October. It's a civil lawsuit that they're using the Ku Klux Klan Act, which is like not very used. So that should be exciting to see how that goes. But yeah, there's been a lot of more like microcosmic cases that have gone on since we started publishing these chats. I mean, one thing that I sort of treasure the most personally is this woman reached out to us being like, hey, my niece had been dating this guy who's like totally in the Traditionalist Worker Party, which is one of the more hardline violent Nazi groups involved in Unite the Right. And she was like, I was trying to convince her to stop dating him. She didn't believe me that he was a Nazi. Like I was able to use your stuff to like actually prove it. So that person was really grateful to us for that. But when we published the chats of this group, Identity Europa, they're one of the more like preppier kind of hipster, like suit and tie Nazi groups. A bunch of their members got exposed as teachers. I believe none of them are employed anymore, but them having access to children was pretty disturbing. And they would talk about how they would teach, versions of history that were in line with their ideology, or, like false versions of history, basically, to perpetuate racist narratives. A bunch of members have been exposed in different parts of the military. Like I think there was 8 or 9 guys in all the different branches of the military that Christopher Mathias with the Huffington Post used some of the data we published to expose them. Most of them got dismissed, but I think at least one of them is still in the Air Force. And then another, a police officer in, I think outside of Richmond, Virginia, he was working as a police officer in a school, and he was a recruiter for Identity Europa. His name was Daniel Morley, and he's no longer a cop as far as we know, but he was
There was even like a black high school student that he was involved in pushing felony charges on based on searching his car. And then like thankfully we learned that case got dropped because due to his white nationalist affiliations, he wasn't really admissible to use anything done by him in court. So those are, and also at least one member of Vanguard America, he posted in the chat that he had just gotten hired as a prison guard in Mississippi, I believe. And we couldn't actually find his name, but I sent a selfie he shared to the Bureau of Prisons there, and the Huffington Post also followed up on it, and we were like, they didn't want to tell us who he was, but they confirmed that he didn't work there anymore, at least. So yeah, there's a lot of different examples. I think there's some people in the chat that haven't been exposed, haven't been identified yet, who are probably still in positions where people are vulnerable to them. So those are the kinds of examples that really motivate me to continue this work, even though it's kind of a bummer sometimes.
Totally. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think we have time for one more question. We actually got a question in the chat off the website, which I'll read out. So someone from Monica from New Orleans, who works with textiles and sociological patterns, wanted to ask Caroline and Nic, what inspires you to make the work that is at the intersection of journalism, social movements, and art? And how do you make the personal decision on what story to tell in your work? Nic, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably, at least, the intersection piece comes from my foundation was writing when I was younger. In high school, and particularly in college, I was editor-in-chief of my newspaper for 2 years. Managed a staff of like 30 people, weekly news publication. And I think that was just my first real introduction into media and understanding how, understanding how to illustrate culture, really. And yeah, I think that theme shows itself, throughout my work now. And in terms of like what stories or messages to share, I think part of how I like kind of delineate is looking at what moves me, what ignites me instantly. I think it's a very visceral type of thing. And I also think some of the stories and the narratives are stories that I would I feel like in so many ways I'm speaking to my younger self when I'm making my work. It's like I'm talking to that 14-year-old who was in an all-white Catholic high school and was questioning his identity and questioning the beauty of his Blackness and questioning the beauty of so many layers of himself. And so whether it's Haiti, work, whether it's sharing these narratives about, the fleur-de-lis or Confederate statues, I think it's just really having a conversation with my younger self. And I think, even too now, I think that's why so much of my work from a engagement standpoint involves youth so much, because I think youth, obviously, I mean, in the cliche sense, they are the future, but it's like, I think that idea of, really, speaking to them and showing them examples of themselves that they may not be seeing yet. And so that, 5, 10, 15 years from now, they may be, that artist, that researcher, or that educator who's really taking the entire collective forward. Not, Black people, yes, but not just us, taking the entire collective of humanity forward. So yeah, that's where it comes from for me, I think.
Totally. Thank you for that. I guess for me, it's sort of hard because a lot of my practice, really started in photography, and photography is, it's pure visual mimicry. And at times there is like a literalness we have to photography. And even though photography can be abstract and expressive and even at times fake, we have special effects in photography. But I always use the camera as a way to sort of document or work through and explore the world around me in different themes. And I mean, a lot of like the work I do when I'm not an artist, as I'm a human rights researcher. And so like I am constantly thinking about harm, and the specific slice of human rights research work I do is on digital technology, or I guess technology is digital, but it's on like platforms, technology, infrastructure, software, things like artificial intelligence, and how technology causes human rights issues and violations in the world. And then I particularly look at it through gender-based violence, bias, and how different marginalized groups are affected. So for me, part of I think what draws me to also make art is I'm still working through and exploring the things I'm doing in my research practice. It's like not necessarily a topic I can put down. I don't know how to put it down, but it's something I find really urgent. And then I think it's also something, I am drawing on this photographic practice of, photographers are often like pulling from a space of like witnessing, if you will, and documentation, but also this idea that things need to exist as proof that it was here and proof of what something was in a way. And so I think that's often what I'm grappling with, particularly when I'm creating work. So a lot of the work I make, I call it research-based art, I call it expanded documentary, but I'm often thinking, how do you make net art or technology-based art with sort of the same rubrics or skeleton or like critical background as a photojournalist? So if you just remove the camera, what are you sort of making with different kinds of like mixed media and like digital and like software-based tools? And so I think for me, that is like a lot of what I find interesting of how do you sort of play with this sort of blurriness of these topics. I think though, I guess for me, the reason it often sort of veers back into journalism is often the sort of urgency I feel around social justice in terms of trying to confront that in art. And I would rather have my work be explicit in those topics than too held back. I never want to be like whispering a topic that I'm doing. I want it to be very like forthright and forthcoming as to like what it is I'm exploring, because that's how urgently I feel about these topics. It's how like consumed I feel about them. But I also think it's important, particularly as a white woman, especially from New Orleans, that it's very clear like what the things are that I think about. And I think then on top of that, I am interested in work that makes other white people uncomfortable and also reflective on their own experiences. And I think that there's not enough work that does that for white audiences, and particularly addressing like whiteness and white supremacy. So your role as a white person in that, right? And I think that uncomfortableness is really important. So that I think for me is my sort of interest in all of this. And, I then approach journalism almost as like a material and also like almost like a medium choice as a way to sort of take an output people are used to seeing, like a newspaper, like a web browser, like a video on YouTube, like a piece of like a tweet, if you will, that's a framing that people sort of see in their everyday lives. So if I take the framing, I can also sort of twist and play and push with the content within that, because it's still grounding people in this sort of space of familiarity. So part of it is I am very much pulling from research rigor, like that is related to journalism, and then also, the materiality of journalism. So using that as a way to kind of, as like an inspiration for like the output of the art. That was a really fantastic question, Monica. I guess I'm just going to ask like one last question for Chris, because in October, we do have the Jason Kessler trial. So I was wondering, Chris, what can we expect to see from Unicorn Riot in October in regards to that trial?
Good question. I mean, I think it's kind of up to how much access we can get to the court. Like, I don't think, like, we were able to live stream the Derek Chauvin trial because so many media companies had like demanded video access. I don't think the court's going to be quite as forthcoming for this. So like definitely like daily court reports, or like hopefully I like to like take notes in court and then live tweet everything on the breaks. So hopefully something like that. And we also have, I'm not sure if it'll be for the August 12th anniversary or for the trial in October, but we do have like we've just received so much data and like different batches of leaks about some of the groups involved that will be, there's like some unreleased things that I think we'll be trying to get out by then. So should be more, just more exposing of people involved.
I was about to say, like, we'll definitely have something made by then. Well, great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I really, really appreciate being in conversation with all of you. This was, I think, really, I mean, I feel so lucky and so guilty. This felt very like fruitful for me on a personal level. I hope it was for all of you as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you all. Thank you, Caroline, for the invitation. Yeah, really, really grateful to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, this has been great. Thank you so much.